Prof, thank you very much for waking up to talk to us. What's the problem in Zimbabwe, particularly in the last 12 months? President Mnangagwa came in amid much fanfare.
Well, yes, and it's interesting that he's talking about a resurrection from the dead, because in 2017, when the coup happened, there was supposed to be a Lazarus-like resurrection of the party. It hasn't happened. When Mnangagwa and his Lacoste group came in, they promised all sorts of liberal or neoliberal economic reforms, and it seems whether or not that reform was really, a real promise, or whether it was sort of a facade, it hasn't happened. Now, is that because of the groups who have coalesced around the state and are sort of manipulating the economy under the table, or is it because when banks extend themselves too much, the securities that get rolled over aren't really backed by real money by the state? Is it because there's a lack of American currency, which actually resurrected the economy back in 2009, but that's not available anymore? Is it because of command agriculture, which was this massive subsidies for maize farmers in particular, but funded again by one of these cabals, and which is now running out of money? And so now Mnangagwa is saying, well, we'll let the private banks take it up. But the private banks are overextended. Inflation's happening again. There's been attempts to recalibrate the RTGS currency with the American dollar and to bring the black market rates up with the interbank market rates. Is that working? It's a really, really tough situation, and it actually could go back even further than the 20 years that we're talking about since, the so-called land reform and the interventions in the DRC war, which started getting the cabals going.
Prof, where's the problem? What about foreign direct investment? Is Zimbabwe attracting that?
Well, no, that's for sure. And, while the command agriculture, for example, is raising the price of maize for the farmers, it's actually becoming more expensive than even to import. So in a few months, when that runs out, where's the maize going to be? They're going to have to import. But I'm not an economist, so I'm at a bit of a, but I'm kind of a historian, and I just remember a conversation I had in 2004 with Patrick Kambai, who used to be a member. Well, he's now late. He was brought in during the war to feed the camps in Mozambique, and they had to get permission from Samora Machel, the then president of Mozambique, to shoot some elephants to feed the soldiers. Well, they didn't have a limit on those elephants. So what they started doing was shooting elephants for their tusks, shooting rhinos, and selling that stuff in the Gulf states and banking it in the banks in London. Now, that, so it goes back a long way. You get this tied up relationship between the ability to raise money, but it's the access to the guns which makes the point. And that was exacerbated in the Congo during the war, when many of the generals, were getting diamonds. They were promised American dollars by Kabila. They didn't get it. But it also strengthened the relationships between business and the military, because, say, your cousin is manufacturing shoes, well, we'll manufacture boots for the army, and you'll get rich together. So it goes back a long, long way. And I think Mthuli Ndube's efforts to solve the problem through fixing the money situation could be part of the answer, but he's got these political problems of these mafia-like groups, some of them connected to the Reserve Bank.
And we've heard calls from people, even like our president, for example, that the problem is perhaps the sanctions and they ought to be lifted. Are these not targeted sanctions?
Some of them are targeted sanctions. Some of them are also American sanctions, which will hit at American business who want to do businesses with Zimbabwean companies. So some of them hurt, some of them don't. But as all of my contacts in Zimbabwe say, well, we're dealing with internal sanctions here. It's these political problems. And I guess there's a debate too. Is it a political problem or an economic problem? So it's a political problem going back to maybe when the coup happened, when the expectations were that there would be another government of national unity. But that fell apart as soon as the coup happened. The ZANU-PF people said, no, we don't need the MDC. Now, if that GNU had happened, there probably would have been relaxed conditions on international aid and all of this sort of stuff, which would have to bolster a recovery, if that recovery was actually intended. Now, that fell apart. If something like that came up again, if the MDC and ZANU-PF said, well, okay, this is a global domestic crisis is bigger than both of us. What can we do together? Would that happen? And if that happened, would the international community come in, and again, you know, the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, bolsterers of that economy come in with a HIPC, heavily indebted poor country relief program, because the promises that were made in 2017 haven't happened. The GNU hasn't happened. The reforms haven't happened. We do have the cabinet ministers, the whole regime going and getting lessons on how to talk the World Bank talk, which is what we hear now. Okay, austerity for prosperity. Okay, we will suffer for a while, but just wait, we'll get it settled in 2 or 3 years. And of course, people are really suffering. You've got nearly 6 million people really, really hungry, you know.
And South Africa is going to start feeling the pressure.
It will again, yes.
Yeah. All right. Prof, thank you very much for your time. Professor David Moore, he is from the University of Johannesburg.